Welcome to Behind the Mask in Conversation with. Behind the Mask is a neurodivergent focused podcast that aims to offer support, knowledge, understanding, and most importantly, exposure to the neurodivergent community. If you are here, firstly, I hope you enjoy the episode. And lastly, if you are enjoying it, please like, follow, share, and subscribe because your support with this podcast can really help us push the message out. Keep being amazing all, and thank you. Okay, so for anybody that's just joined in or listening on podcast platforms or YouTube, this is Behind the Mask. It is a neurodivergent podcast made by neurodivergent people for neurodivergent people. And the whole entire mission of this podcast is to raise awareness, increase visibility, and also increase understanding and knowledge around neurodivergent conditions and how they can impact individuals, and also in some cases how you as individuals could support neurodivergent people in this place we call the world. So this is episode 2 of season 2, and I'm joined by Ludo, who is known to many as Brain Curiosities. He's a creator that I met very early on in my TikTok journey, and we've kind of loosely had conversations in and out. We've interacted in lives a few times, but one thing for me that always stands out is your knowledge and understanding and the work you've put into understanding like neurology as a whole, and then later on ADHD and neurodivergency. So from me to you, thank you very much for agreeing to join us, Ludo.
Yeah, I mean, thanks a lot for the occasion. Honestly, it's it's a pleasure to be able to chat a bit also with other neurodivergent creators and also to just share knowledge. I'm also curious about what people are curious about, I guess. So I'm just happy to be here.
It's easy to assume, like, and I think you find this, like, when you get at the starting blocks, you lay your foundations, you learn the basics, but then as time goes on, you want to learn more and more and more. And for me, this kind of hyperfixation rabbit hole after getting diagnosed, it isn't going away. Like, I am here for the knowledge, and this is part and parcel of doing this podcast because I love learning about things that are special interests. And yeah, you are a man with a lot of knowledge. So for anyone listening or watching, tell us about you, introduce yourself, and yeah, let us know about Ludo.
So my name is Ludovico. I'm half Italian and half French, and I've moved to Spain at some point 6 years ago for a PhD in neuroscience. So my job, my studies was biology, then cognitive neuroscience, and then finally a PhD in neuroscience. And I've discovered that I had ADHD and that also my partner was ADHD through actually my neuroscience courses. Unlike many other people that discovered it or found out about it through social media, maybe TikTok and stuff, I actually just found it in the classroom. And I was like, oh, wait, this sounds awfully familiar because we're actually studying ADHD as a neurodivergency during my master's. Then my partner got diagnosed and was like, oh, actually, you seem to be very similar to that as well. And at first, like, I think everyone, I went through the denial phase being like, nah, obviously not me. I'm just, chronically distracted, but I'm not ADHD. It turns out I was. And when I got my diagnosis, actually, that helped me finish my PhD in neuroscience, which I finished in January. And now I'm working with a YouTube channel in order to do more scientific communication, scientific divulgation, more specifically about psychology and neuroscience as a whole. And I'm also following a couple of courses and formation to be able maybe someday to, coach people or to explain more about ADHD and neurodivergency. Just keep learning, as you said, because it's been a big interest of mine.
And it is, and I think, like, what I love, and this is why I love this app, I love learning from other people, because one thing I learned early on with ADHD, and at the minute I'm more or less completing the autism diagnosis. And what I've learned is that when I first found out about my neurodivergence, I kind of felt like I had to have everything that everyone was saying. And if I saw a video on here that someone said, I'm like, oh, I don't relate to that. What that did is it drove in me the imposter syndrome of going, you don't have that, you must not have it. And what I very quickly learned, thankfully, is this neurodiversity and neurodivergence scale is an absolute pool full of balls, each with symptoms on them. And in my head, we all get our own little selection of these balls with our own symptoms, and some may be similar, some may differ. But neurodivergence as a whole is huge. It's a scale.
Yep.
And this is why learning for me is key, because if I can learn about myself, great. But actually, when we're in a position where we're supporting and helping others as well, knowledge is power, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Once you understand how your own brain works, you understand your own framework through the world, it's a lot easier to navigate because then you're aware of your limitations, you're aware of your strengths, you're aware of how you react in certain situations, and you know what situations can be even dangerous for you and which ones are safe. And so everything becomes a lot easier once you understand yourself. But as you said, it's also very chaotic, and it's a whole spectrum, even within
Mm-hmm.
ADHD or within autism. And so you also have to learn how that what does that mean for you, right? Because I've been doing a lot of videos about, for example, ADHD in women that expresses sometimes differently than in men. But it can also express in exactly the same way. It can express differently in children or in adults. It can be expressed differently if you have a severe or a mild form, or if you had grew up in a traumatizing environment or in a healthy environment, right? All these factors, all these things, they come together and they make neurodivergence and how it's expressed extremely complicated and extremely complex. So at the end of the day, you just have to understand how you function. It's just that knowing about neurodivergent, it kind of gives you some, statistical guidelines, because at the end of the day, even though it is a spectrum, a lot of people that have ADHD will have more or less similar symptoms. A lot of people with autism will have more or less similar traits, and so on and so on. And so
And I
it's,
think that's why when it goes
yeah,
back to the initial assessment criteria, there's set assessments. But I think you really hit on something there where there's this whole stigma around it's just down to the parents and it's the parents' fault and that. And one thing you very quickly learn is, firstly, it's genetic.
yeah,
It's more than likely passed down, and
yeah,
it's something that's going to be hereditary. But also, as well, I think something you said then, the environmental factors that you grow up in, it doesn't necessarily mean your parenting or your
no,
parents or anything like that. It is literally your life and lived experiences from a young age, and how people around you have reacted to things, how people have pushed things, and how it kind of creates this wall and kind of barrier. It's that whole that saying, isn't it? Like 20,000 more negative comments have stuck to a
yeah.
neurodivergent child than they do to a neurotypical, and it's mad to think that those figures are there.
Yeah, and also, imagine not because we're thinking, obviously, when we say environment, we're thinking of the parenting and we're thinking of the psychological environment, but the physical environment can make a difference as well, right? So there is a paper on Nature that came out last year, actually, so a very recent one that showed that gut microbiome diversity, the bacteria that are
Mm.
in your stomach, actually these populations change as a function of socioeconomic status. And what bacteria you have in your gut, they can change, what taste for food you have, or your relationship to food very early on when you're a kid. So just being born in certain neighborhoods as compared to others can have already massive impacts on how your brain and your gut and your body develops. So everything is at the end of the day interconnected. Some things have a more direct impact, and some things have a more long term, longer, or more indirect impact and stuff. But yeah, environment encompasses kind of everything. But as you said, ADHD is mostly genetic.
Yeah, and I think like for me, I think like what's clear is that my ADHD has always been there. But when it started to really show itself significantly, where it impacts, was when the stabilizers come off. When you move away from that structure that you know of school, parents, the what I consider my life stabilizers. When those stabilizers are taken off, and there's this societal expectation that you're going to be able to manage and you're going to get things right and you're going to do A, B, C, and D in that order because that's how people go. Internally, that's when my chaos started. Like, Like my behaviors have always been there, but the significant impact, I'd say 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 was where there was a real heightened focus on how it started to impact me. And I just tried to stop people seeing it and just masked, but I had no idea what it was. I think, and often a lot of people just feel that they're ultimately just shit at doing life, and it batters you, doesn't it? I mean, because
Yeah,
you were quite late. How old were you when you were diagnosed?
I was 28.
So still late on. It's mad to
Yeah,
think that you went through a huge proportion of your academic studies
yeah.
not knowing that actually you had something that have may hinder your progress against where you could have been.
Yeah, I think, when I started living alone, I was 18. And so I just went away from my parents' home. And as you said, the whole structure, they're the ones that are uh, cooking, they're the ones that are managing finances and so on. So it's all stuff that when you're teenagers, you don't have to worry about. So it's kind of easy, more or less, to, stay in school and you have a few responsibilities. And if you're interested in the courses, which I was, then it was fine. I've always been, the responsible one, the good student, and so on. As soon as I started to live alone, I continued to be the responsible student in school and in university, but at home, I just could not do chores. Like for the life of me, I could not clean up my house. I just could not do all of these everyday things that everyone else seemed to do with such ease, and I could not understand why it was so difficult for me to just remember to do them. So I started being very anxious, of course, started getting some depression as well. But I just had moved from a very sunny country to a very dark one. So I thought, maybe it's just the weather, maybe it's just the stress, it's maybe just because of university. So I always had an excuse, more or less, to feel as stressed and as depressed as I was feeling
Mm.
because I was moving around a lot. And it was also always a high pressure thing. So I thought, yeah, it's normal that I'm stressed. It's normal that I'm struggling. It's just because of university. It's just because of the masters. It's just because this year I'm moving. It's just because it's dark. And at some point, I got to Spain and COVID hit, and I just ran out of excuses. And I was like, okay, there's something here that cannot be
Mm.
explained by any other external factor. And it was very, pointed out by my partner. And yeah, when I went to the doctor, they were like, "Oh yeah, you're ADHD, like big time."
And that's the thing, isn't it? Like I resonate with that so much. Trying to qualify everything by looking at external factor, looking at externally where the impact might be. And very rarely do we actually go, okay, let's flip the mirror and look back on us. What internal factors are causing these? Because we're just kind of taught, and I don't even think it's just a British thing. I think it's like across everywhere. Of you kind of you just dust yourself off, you try again, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going.
Yeah,
But
and I was just like, "Yeah, I have to handle, and in 1 year it's going to feel better, and then it was again in 1 year
mm,
it's going to be better, and so on and so on."
but by keeping going, all we're like respectively doing is just continuing to run into chaos. Like that's how when I look at it now, I think, yeah, I kept going and I did great to get through a significant period of time. But all I was doing was just running head on into more chaos because I hadn't established why. It's mad.
Yeah, I was just burning myself out because I was trying to, keep it all together, which I did, I must say, right? I haven't gone that much into chaos, but by managing to keep stuff together, I just burned myself out in the process.
Mhm.
And I just got through a period at the end of my PhD where I just couldn't function anymore. I just felt like an empty shell of who I was before.
Yeah, absolutely. And burnout is not pleasant. So let's return back to that question that many people ask then from someone with your experience and studies and knowledge. So what is ADHD?
Well, it's a different brain structure. I would say it's a neurodivergence. It's just your brain is functioning slightly differently because you have some systems in your brain that are all interconnected, right? Your brain has more than 1 trillion connections and synapses, and those can interact in a whole bunch of ways. And when you have some or certain mutations about certain neurotransmitters like dopamine, then you're going to have some systems that are going to be impacted. And with ADHD in particular, the system that is most impacted is the prefrontal cortex that controls executive functioning. And so that is planning, organization, I'm going to say, time management. All of these things are part of the executive functions. And when that system is disrupted,
we just go back then? Sorry, cut a little bit then. So the prefrontal cortex, the executive function, which helps with what areas? Sorry.
So executive functions are basically planning, organization, time management, time perception, emotional regulation, helps with motivation, helps with focus, with especially internal motivation. And so all of that is controlled by that area in the prefrontal cortex that is called the anterior cingulate cortex. And actually people with ADHD have statistically, they have a reduced mass of that brain area. It's just smaller. And this is probably because we have mutations where we have an underexpression of dopamine receptors. And so with brain plasticity and with all the things that the brain does, then you have some areas that will become naturally understimulated while others become overstimulated. And this is also why we have sensory issues, or we have issues with signal to noise processing, right? So this is what ADHD is basically. It's an understimulation in all of that area, in all of the executive functions.
Okay, and for any people, because and this is where I kind of sit on the fence, for people that aren't willing to understand the extremities of ADHD, it sounds and like people have said to me, it sounds like you're just saying you can't be bothered to do something, but it's really I don't know how you articulate to somebody the actual way in which the brain just isn't firing, the inability to just get up and go and move into certain things or direct into it. Like, what is the reasoning for that? Because it's in our brains. You mentioned where it sits and the prefrontal cortex being an issue for us. But how would you tell neurotypical the why as to why ADHDers struggle with these things?
First of all, I would say that you cannot convince people who do not want to be convinced, right? You have people who just don't necessarily want to understand. They just want to give you their opinion. They think you're lazy, and no matter what you say, they're going to keep thinking that. So don't waste your energy with those kind of people. For those who do want to understand, then how to explain it to them. It's also as a function of what do they respond to. Because a lot of people are not necessarily scientists. If you talk about executive functions or brain areas, they might not respond to that because it's not something that they might be connecting to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say find a way to explain it to them in a way that connects to what is valuable to them. So one way in which I explain ADHD very often in kind of a metaphoric way is, imagine if you're in a room and you have 5 televisions that are, open, and each one is on a different channel, and they all have the volume pumped up to a maximum. And at the same time, you have to listen to a conversation with someone, pay attention, and take notes, right? This is how ADHD feels for me. Yeah. And everyone else has kind of a remote control that allows them to just put down the volume of the other TVs and listen to the conversation, or put up the volume if they want to. But people with ADHD just don't have that remote control.
No, I love that. Yeah, I like that analogy. I think someone said to me before about a bit like a big shiny sports car having like a clapped out engine in it. And externally you look, oh my God, that's a beast of a car. That's going to fly. But actually the engine that's been put in it is the wrong one. So it might all look all singing and all dancing, but no matter what you do with the throttle, sometimes you're just not going to hit the capacities what you think that car should.
Yeah, and also there is, a known psychological bias that is called misattribution bias, where people tend to attribute defects or failings from other people to their own personal and moral failures, while they attribute their own failures to external events, right? If I come late to work, it's because of traffic. If you come late to work, it's because you haven't left the house soon enough, right? And this is very common, and a lot of people are actually misattributing what happens with neurodivergent people all of the time, because we're not able to do basic stuff. And for a lot of people, this is because we don't try hard enough. And it's because they've never been inside our brain, but also because just, very simple psychological biases. But there are also a lot of things that sometimes we can do and they can't, right?
Yeah, and I think
So it's,
sometimes I think, and I've said to a few people, like, I don't anticipate or expect you to understand, but what I would appreciate is if when I'm telling you something, you just accept that that's how it is for me. You don't have to understand, just just be empathetic and understand that that is how it is for me, and I can't make you understand the whys, but that's the reality, kind of thing.
I absolutely agree. This is something that I also say all the time. You don't need to understand to respect someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Just
think I
treating
think
people as human beings, right?
yeah, absolutely, individuals as well. And I think I've worked in education for years, and one of the key things that I always got praised on was teaching individuals, not a class. So you addressed the class, but you taught individuals based on what their needs was. And actually, you're not there to teach most of the time. You're there to facilitate learning, and learning looks different. And that's kind of how my brain is. Like I'm capable of learning. I just learn different. Like allow that to happen for me. So there's three key types currently with ADHD, which they talk about: combined, inattentive, and hyperactive. So they've got the left, the right, and the middle ground with the combined and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, so what are the differences between, say, inattentive and hyperactive? So what are the main differences, I suppose, in people who have those different types of
So
ADHD?
on at the brain level, I haven't seen evidence that points towards very repeatable and obvious differences between those types. Also because according to latest researchers, people can actually change throughout their life, right? And this is also why, with the latest editions of the DSM and also of other diagnostic books like the ICD, they actually call them now presentations instead of types, because you
Okay.
you you are ADHD, but as a function of where you are in your life, you might just have a different presentation and might express itself in different ways, right? Imagine you're a kid, you are full of energy because you're a kid, you run around all the time, you're hyperactive, but then you grow into an adult and I don't know, you become a parent or something, and suddenly you have a little one and you're sleep deprived. You can't be hyperactive
Hmm.
because you just don't have the energy for it.
But the
So you might
mind,
just
the
switch.
mind could become the hyperactive rather than the
Well, yeah,
physical output as well.
actually, in the inattentive presentation, a lot of people and a lot of research says that it's the mind that is hyperactive. Your mind never stops, but that can look differently. And for example, women, girls, they're usually educated to be quieter and to not speak up and to not be disruptive and stuff. And so they tend to have an inattentive presentation, but that's not because their mind isn't hyperactive. It's just because they're taught to not show it.
Hmm. Almost
Uh,
conditioned to be a certain way.
yeah,
And I think in a lot of ways as well, like public knowledge and spotlight on neurodivergency is helping more people get diagnosed, but also um, the shift in these stereotypes which needs to happen. And actually, like, we're seeing like a lot more strong women and young children who are really pushing out of the old school kind of set ways that they should have been, and I'm here for it. But actually, if they're pushing out the box that they were put in, they're going to start presenting potentially earlier because it's not conforming, it's not being how you should be. People are being more authentic and therefore
yeah.
displaying these earlier on as well.
Yeah, there's definitely a possibility of that people are being more authentic, and so they're just expressing how they truly are. It's also possible that there are tons of environmental factors. There's also more awareness about ADHD, so people are just going to notice that this exists. As whereas 50 years ago, people did not even know that this was a thing.
I
Uh,
think it
a lot
was
of doctors didn't even know.
I read in
All right.
relation to the different types of ADHD and whatnot then. So The one for me was I would never have said I was hyperactive until somebody said, "Okay, take the word hyperactive, just put in there mentally busy and loud and chaotic, impulsive in your actions and behaviors sometimes." And then it was as soon as they stripped back hyperactive, because even as somebody that's worked in education for 17, 18 years, I still saw that naughty kid punching a wall, kicking off, flipping a table. And it was just a massive aha moment for me when they put those words underneath and you just go tick, 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 tick.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of impulsivity, right? Because as we were saying before, with the executive functions, you have a lack of emotional regulation, a lack of emotional control, and lack of planning. And people with ADHD would tend to do things immediately before we have the time, to kind of cool down. A lot of neurological theory says that we have an old brain, there's the emotional one, and then we have the kind of more evolved brain, which is the prefrontal. And usually when we get emotional, we have kind of this prefrontal cortex that is a brake and tells us, wait a second before you react. And people with ADHD kind of don't have a brake. Another metaphor for ADHD that I heard a lot is we have a Ferrari emotional brain with bicycle brakes.
Yeah. But little things like that really help to contextualize it, because you just go, yeah, that makes sense. That makes absolute
Because you
sense.
just,
Yeah.
and then you just can't go back.
And with that, so something that you've done a lot of content and videos around is the kind of increased number of neurodivergent or undiagnosed neurodivergent people with ADHD and other conditions where substance misuse is an issue,
Yep.
or addiction as a whole, which could be in many forms. We hear a lot about food addiction and um, sex addiction and all types
Yeah.
of addictions and risky potentially behaviors. Why
Yep.
is that? So why are those figures so high? Why is there more risk for us?
So I've done actually a video, I think a couple of weeks ago, about that, and there are mainly three, four main reasons that I can come up with. The first reason is because a lot of people who are neurodivergent, autistic, or ADHD, they're not happy, right? Because you constantly have to evolve in a world that's not meant for you, and so it's harder. You have more anxiety, you have more depression. And something that a lot of people need to understand is that people do not get addicted for fun. People get addicted usually to cope with something, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get a substance because you want to get away from something. It's very rare that people are going to, randomly do very hard drugs out of nowhere with a bunch of friends that they have a very healthy relationship with.
Yeah,
It's usually not the
and
case,
it
right?
is like we hear about that dopamine and stuff like that. But
So
then,
that's the second point.
yeah, I've heard from a lot of people with who have had substance problems with maybe class A's and things like that, that actually how they've experienced taking that drug has not been like their neurotypical friends. Like they've seen their neurotypical friends off their face, like jaws rocking, all the stereotypical impacts. But actually, they're like, I just felt present. I just felt normal. I felt balanced. And it's weird because I've experienced that in my younger years, like a balanced feeling, and actually I liked that feeling. So the risk factor of me chasing that was very risky there for me.
Yeah, so that's the second and third reason I was going to mention. So the second reason is, of course, that our brains are wired differently. So any substance that we might take will not act in the same way. So, for example, I'm going to make a very simple example. Alcohol is an inhibitor of the brain, right? It reduces your overall brain activity. And in a population of, let's say, autistic people who have, on average, more dendrites and more synapses than the average neurotypical brain, so they have very often an overexcited brain, then taking alcohol will just make them feel normal instead of overactive and overstimulated all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we're wired differently. Also, people with ADHD, as we have a problem with the dopamine system, dopamine is not only what regulates attention and all of that, it also what regulates reward in the ventral tegmental area, like the reward area of the brain. And when that area is dysregulated, it's a lot easier for us to become addicted, because then you take a substance, the area suddenly becomes active, and your brain has that kind of hit of pleasure, and you're like, oh, wait, I actually kind of like this. And you go back for more. And this is because we have a deficit in the dopamine system, that we have a hard time activating that area in other ways. And the brain, for survival, it's wired to make you repeat behaviors that activate the reward system, and to make you not repeat behaviors that do not activate that area. And so you're more likely to just repeat behaviors, which is taking drugs, if it activates that area. And finally, the third reason is what you said, is because most people, when they are, most neurodivergent people, when they're on drugs, they just feel normal. They feel like they can finally function like everybody else. I know that for a very long time when I was younger, I felt that when I was a bit drunk, I was like, I'm an actually way better person when I'm drunk, because I'm suddenly just not stressed about everything. And feeling normal is something that is so much harder to let go than any other feeling of euphoria people may feel. Because for once, you're like, wow, I fit in. This is how people live every day. I never want to let this go. And so you go back for more.
But it's the knowing when to stop, isn't it? It's like let's take it back to layman's. If you're eating a cake and you're like, oh my god, this tastes good, you're going to go back, and you're going to go back, and you're going to go back, because you don't want that taste to stop. But then sooner or later you're going to throw up because you've had too much cake. And it's not knowing when to stop that can, like for me, has probably led to problems over the years. I have a drink, I become this version of me, and I'm here for it, but then I don't know where to stop. And then all of a sudden my body just goes, no thank you, and then
Yeah.
and it
So
and yeah, that's the impact for me.
yeah, food may be a bit different, but if we stay on the substances that really activate your reward pathway, the issue is that the brain is also a self-regulating machine. So if at some point the activity in some brain area increases, then the brain is like, oh, I understand that there is an increase in this area, so my job is now to make it decrease. So it wants to regulate that area back to what it was and to the baseline levels that it has. So when you take a substance, let's say alcohol, then that area is activated. But then you want more, because suddenly you start coming down from it. But the doses and the amount of alcohol that you need to get back to the level that you were before is higher, because now you have your brain that is fighting against itself to try and go back to homeostasis. And the more that happens, then there are, the genetic factors, epigenetic factors that come into play, the activations of some receptors that come in, and this can take months and months to change. But after a while, every time you take the drug, then it's going to have less and less effect. And when you're off the drug, it's actually going to be worse and worse, because when you don't have the substance to balance that, then the brain is still trying to balance your area to homeostasis. So you're actually lower than you were before. And this is why you also go back, because let's say you feel anxious, you drink, you feel calm. The alcohol goes out of your body, you feel anxious, but even more than before, because meanwhile, your brain has activated to regulate itself.
It makes
And
so much sense. I talk about a lot, like when I try and explain my baseline, it's like my baseline's -10. My starting point for the day is -10. And I have to do everything I can just to try and get as close to zero, just to feel level. But then if I have a drink, I feel like it supersizes from -10 to +10. But then I significantly crash to -10 very quickly. It's not gradual, it's not cushioned, it's not soft. It is a crash, unless I have another drink, or I repeat the same process to chase it. But every time I'm going -12 +12, -14 +4, and it is that drop in the distance, and the crash it is significantly more.
Yeah, and then the next day you're at -40 and you're like, what the hell? How did I get here? And then just to survive, then you need a drink just to get back at -10.
Yeah.
And that's why addiction happens. That's how addiction happens.
and that kind of understanding that you've just put there with the brain and how it kind of fights against you feeling normal, that makes so much sense as to just thinking about the impact in motion that substance or drink has had on me or others. It makes so much sense of the feeling that you get. There's such significant differences.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Whenever I
that's
take a
great.
drink, I feel great for the evening. The next day, I feel like crap. I'm in a bad mood. I don't want to do anything. I'm very nervous. I go from the -10 to the -15 just suddenly, without any transition or any sort of thing. And a lot of people might not understand why, even because sometimes it's just a very very small drink.
Hmm.
But this is what the brain does, right? It tries constantly to regulate itself back to baseline. So in order to get out of this, the ideal would be to change the baseline, but that is a very slow and complex process. So
Okay.
yeah.
Um, so when you look at the medication side of things,
Yeah.
so a lot of people will go, you treat ADHD with the equivalent of speed and whatnot, and this, and we know it's not the equivalent,
Yeah.
it's a form of, but why, based on what we've just said, like, why is it that we have to have stimulant, potentially medication, to help our brains? I know there's a variety of different medications that can treat it, but one of the prominent ones is a stimulant. Is that for exactly the reasons you've just mentioned?
So the stimulant medications that we're taking, they're actually agonists for some very specific dopamine receptors, and these are the ones that are understimulated in our prefrontal cortex. So the medication is going to go there and bind itself on the receptors, and then suddenly, boom, your dopamine network can now function appropriately. So this is what stimulant medication does. Also, you said, it's a lot of people make the analogy with speed or whatever. I think it's funny because, for example, methylphenidate, which is the most prescribed stimulant medication for ADHD, is a derivative of amphetamine, but it's not necessarily amphetamine. And just in the same way, estrogen is also a steroid hormone, right? So if you have
Mm-hmm.
someone taking steroids, it can mean two very different things sometimes, as a function of which one you're taking. So this is also why it's kind of funny, because the chemical origin of a compound doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to do the exact same thing. Anyway, stimulant medication, it kind of just rebalances that system that in ADHD is constantly understimulated, and so it just gets you back to normal levels when you can actually focus on stuff. But then you also have to do the work, because medication is not everything. It helps. It just massively helps. It helps you not being distracted all the time. It helps you not being hyperactive all the time. It helps you not having constant noise in your head. But you still have, with therapy or with whatever tools are at your disposal, you still have to do some work, because over the years, especially if you're late diagnosed, you're going to have some habits that you have taken with your ADHD, and these
Mm-hmm.
habits, even under medication, it's a lot of work to get rid of them. It's hard when you're late diagnosed. I guess when you're early diagnosed, it may be a bit easier to cope, but when you're late diagnosed, then you have to relearn to live all over again, even with
Yeah,
medication.
and I think, like, I'm waiting to start medication at the minute. I've probably got a couple of months left before I get to the point where I'm at the top of the list, and people are like, "Well, you're managing and stuff. Like, why do you want to do it?" And I'm just like, because if there's a chance that I could take everything I've done to work on myself and learned to manage as I am now, if there's a chance I can take something that is going to aid that management, it's only going to be a positive. And maybe take some of the weight off me managing it. If my brain's working with me as well, that for me
And
it's
also, just managing, what kind of a life is that, right?
yeah,
Yeah, you manage, you survive, you have a job, and then you get home and you're exhausted. um,
yeah.
my partner that has a way more severe form of ADHD than I have told me that the day they took their medication was the day that they stopped surviving and started living. And what anyone wants to do in this planet, in this world, neurotypical or neurodivergent or whatever, is that you actually want to live. You don't want to just barely survive. So
Yeah,
yeah, getting by is just not enough.
it's exhausting. It really is. Um, One video you did, and this is kind of jumping away, but something that caught my interest was alexithymia or
Oh yeah.
alexithymia. What's the best way of saying that?
I think it's alexithymia, honestly, but I think it depends whether you're in the UK or in the US. So I just don't. I think
And
both are fine.
and this was something I discovered myself probably 6 months ago, and it was a growth stage for me as well because it explained a lot as to why I just couldn't identify certain things or name it or label it and stuff like that. So, what is alexithymia?
So this is kind of a very big oxymoron for a lot of people with ADHD, right? It seems because we both have emotional dysregulation, so all of our emotions are very, very strong, but at the same time, a lot of us have alexithymia, which is not being able to recognize your emotions, not being able to understand or recognize your own emotions. So this can feel, a bit oxymoron at times, but it's still very much the case. And this is probably because we have so much noise in our heads that this is what in neuroscience is called interference, that there is a lot of signal interference. So you still have your body and your mind that is sending you signals for your emotions, for even, you're hungry or you have eaten enough or you're thirsty or you need to go to the bathroom. But those signals are drowned amidst a whole lot of other noise, which can be, oh, look, a bird outside the window, or it just can be, oh, I have made a story inside my head for the past 30 minutes and I just forgotten that I exist in a physical body because it just created interference. So, something that is true with ADHD is that we have a problematic noise to signal ratio. So we recognize a lot of noise, external noise when you're into the street as signal. And so we pay attention to a lot of stuff that other people don't. But this also means that we pay less attention to what is actually the signal, which in this case can be emotions or bodily signals. And this is also true for autism because when you have an overconnected brain, you're going to have so much signal all the time that the actual signals are going to be drowned amidst all of that information.
And that makes sense as to like there's so many people that take a kind of disliking to the name attention deficit when actually when you strip it back and as you've just said there's a hell of a lot of attention there but potentially it's just not in the right places but there's that much of it it stops you being able to just opt where you want to apply that focus.
Yeah, so Russell Barkley actually talked about this, and he was one of the first. He's actually, one of the biggest researchers on ADHD, worked on it for 45 years. He has his own YouTube channel and so on, so there's a lot of information if you want to go there as well. But basically, he says that the name is bad because it's not a deficit of attention, it's more that we cannot regulate it. Everyone else has a remote control. Again, you can put your attention from 1 to 10, and you can decide what level of focus you want to put on something. And people with ADHD, they only have 1 and 10. That's it. That's kind of have too much or not enough.
And it
So,
is, and like
yeah.
it makes sense. Like I used to work in management, and I'd sit in management meetings, and people would want to move forward on a meeting before the penny had dropped for me, and I'd be like, no, 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 you don't understand. I need to understand what you finished, otherwise the rest of this meeting is written off, because I'll hear it and all the distractors will be there, but my mind will solely be locked on that one thing because I'll be like, if I don't ask now, I'm going to lose that kind of train of thought.
Yeah, I absolutely get that. And yeah, we have the two modes. We're either distracted by every single signal or stimulus that we have outside of us, or we hyper focus on one thing. And it can seem from the outside as obsession, or it can seem as if we just forget everything and we stay 8 hours doing something. And we don't even hear if there's a fire or if someone is calling our name or anything else.
And that's where like the hyper focus you just mentioned, like people could, and again I have to step back and go, I could understand why you might think certain ways because when I'm enjoying something I'm going to do it better, quicker, and on a level that you would never achieve, let alone
Yeah.
in the time frame I'm going to do it. And they're like, but you enjoying that, so you want to do it. And I'm like, yeah, it makes sense, but it's that you like, it's hard to explain how it feels when you are absolutely engrossed in something, when
Yeah.
something is giving you that reward constantly, and the more you learn, the more you do, it just enriches that feel good factor. And yeah, it is that, like, that's boring and this is exciting, but actually no, this is exciting and it is giving me everything
Yeah.
I've been lacking.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing is that, the attention regulation system in humans, it comes from survival, right? From years and centuries and millennia of evolution, because you have to be able to concentrate on stuff to keep doing it, but you also have to be able to, have a bit of a wider vision in case there is danger so that you can react quickly. And when you have ADHD, you either see everything all the time, which means that it's very difficult to focus, or it's suddenly all signal and no noise, which means that if we were in the forest, for example, and any predator comes out behind us, we would not hear it coming. So for survival, it would be very bad in these kind of
Mm-hmm.
terms. So this is why the regulation exists. But it's also true that when you have all signal and no noise, then you're also able to concentrate to such intense levels that suddenly you're faster, and suddenly you understand things better, and suddenly you do things better just because you have nothing else interacting with what you're doing at the moment. So it's a
Yeah.
trade-off. It's a surviving trade-off.
But my God, it feels good when you get it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you get that hyper focus, and like even with some things, it can still be very scatty. But like the way in which I organize things, and when I'm hyper focused and I'm enjoying it, it will just be all in the abyss. And I almost just press a button and it just clicks together, and everything, the picture's just clear from utter chaos. But that's the way my brain works.
Yeah.
Little small segments, and then my brain's got the ability just to boom,
Yeah.
and it's complete.
Yeah. Yeah, this is exactly how it feels for me as well. I kind of have, there's the multiple screens in movies, and I just kind of pick them up, and then suddenly it all just fits together and it feels amazing. But this is also because during hyperfocus, this is your dopamine firing. So that means that your reward system is engaged.
Yeah.
And this is also why it feels good, because your reward system is actually engaged.
And with that, so we've mentioned kind of an overview of ADHD, the whys, the whatnots, how it could be for different people, the treatments, some of the downsides to it and stuff. But if people don't have a diagnosis yet, so everyone isn't diagnosed before getting diagnosed, and I think
Yep.
thankfully self-diagnosis is getting less frowned upon because it makes sense that everybody's self-diagnosed beforehand. But this may also apply to people who are diagnosed. How can an ADHDer best help themselves to live better, more fulfilled lives? Are there some key tips that people can apply? Are there some fundamental things that are just non-negotiables for an ADHDer?
Yeah, absolutely. You have some lifestyle changes that you can make. So first of all, and a lot of people, are going to not like this, but first of all, you can fix your sleep. Sleep, 80% of people with ADHD have issues with sleep. And unfortunately, sleep is also what regulates your entire nervous system and your entire body. So if you fix your sleep, even if your ADHD will not go away, it will become easier to manage. And you will suffer less from it, because having ADHD and suffering from ADHD are two very different things. Then, of course, a lot of people advise physical activity, exercise, sports, and stuff. But I also know that not everyone is in a place to do that. I started physical activity last year, and it did change a lot in how I feel and in how my ADHD feels. But it's also true that before that moment, I would never have been able to start. So if you're not in a place to do exercise, don't, because just don't force yourself to do something that you cannot keep up, because it's just going to be a negative feedback, and that's not
Yeah, I
worth
was
it.
just going to say, like if you continually set yourself up to fail, that
Yeah,
feeling
exactly.
like you're failing, it's that negative reinforcement that, oh, you're no good at this, you can't do that anyway.
I would say set up a routine and take small steps, small incremental steps. People have to learn to walk before they run a marathon. So you cannot expect tomorrow to completely change your life, start exercising at 6, eat healthy, and keep off screens and have a perfect sleep schedule. That's just not going to happen. So first focus on one thing, do that, and once that is consolidated and it's easy to do and it's in your routine, you go to the next thing. You have to learn to walk before you run a marathon. So the first and most essential thing I would focus on before anything else is definitely sleep. You can take help for that. You can have melatonin that can help you sleep. This apparently helps a lot of people with ADHD. People with autism need more melatonin because, of course, their brain are more connected, so they need more melatonin to kind of calm down. And this can rebalance your hormones, and after a while, your sleep cycles will get better. You can get yourself tested for sleep apnea. A lot of people with ADHD have sleep apnea, either obstructive or not obstructive. This is where you kind of just wake up during the night without realizing it. People can wake up to 30 to 40 times per hour. And that means that the quality of sleep that you're getting is absolutely shit.
That. Is it REM sleep?
You always stay in REM sleep, basically. You never go to slow wave, and slow wave is where you actually rest. So if you have sleep apnea, then you're going to be exhausted all the time, and whether you sleep 5, 15 hours, it will not make a difference because you will not get that quality sleep, right? So fixing your sleep, I think, is one of the most essential steps to be able to move forward. Also because once you fix your sleep, you're less exhausted. If you're less exhausted, you also have more energy to kind of address other things. Then you can start taking, if you have deficits, some supplements. But I've spoken to a nutritionist that is doing research on ADHD, and she actually told me that, for example, 70% of people, especially in the UK, they have deficits at least in magnesiums, probably tryptophan, vitamin D, and zinc. So if you take, supplements in these, then it's probably going to rebalance something that is missing anyway. The thing is that if you already have all the levels that are perfect, if you take supplements, it's not going to change anything. Just,
your body
let's
will
be aware
only
of that.
ever have what it needs from something.
Yeah, exactly. But since 70% of people are having deficits of vitamin D and magnesium, it's a safe bet that taking those will help.
Yeah,
Right?
I did another podcast with a lady called the Nature Doc, Lucinda, and she mentioned some of those you're on about, and also for women as well in their menstrual cycles and stuff. They are already losing zinc and iron and different things. So if you've got the fact that a lot of people are lacking already, then you've got other impacts. Then you've got ADHD. The deficit is just getting significant from what your body needs to complete it. And
exactly.
I'm pro supplement as generally. I think it's important to look into where you're getting them from, and the rawest form of the ingredient you can get is always going to be the better. The more you sugarcoat something up and fancy it up with a jelly, it's changing the raw form, in my opinion. But I've been taking magnesium from a particular company that sent them to me, and I've been taking them for 9 days now, and out at 9 days, days 1 to 3 didn't feel anything. Day 4 I slept a little bit more, and I found myself yawning, like tired yawning, not just exhausted, like my body was going, oh, it's time for sleep. And I was like, and it was literally within a week. I'd say I'm getting 5/6 hours of what I feel is good sleep.
Yeah.
Because for
that
me,
can change your life.
Yeah, like 5 hours for me, everyone will go, you need 8. But if I can get 5 hours, I am happy, because that's just where I'm crap at sleeping. But magnesium, these particular ones, I've seen a significant change.
Yeah.
And I think it's the concentrate of the actual ingredient that I've just felt such a significance. So good.
Yeah, and some people will need more, some people will need less, but generally, taking magnesium and vitamin D is not going to mess you up. So if you already have enough, it's just not going to change anything. But if you don't have enough, then it can make a difference.
Yeah, well, the particular ones, they have your daily requirement in the capsule, and it just said like ultimately they've got the ability to give you exactly what you need up to your recommended allowance. If you're at 0% or you're at 80%, you'll only have what you need from them, but it'll
Yeah,
balance
perfect.
them.
And
um
yeah,
are there any other supplements that you think are beneficial? I know this isn't something we mentioned, and if you don't want to talk about it, I just
I
think
know
of the
that's fine.
things. So things like lion's mane and stuff like that. So again, I've tried lion's mane myself, and I did feel some benefit just with cognitive and brain fog and stuff, but it took a while for it to get into my system and kind of to feel that benefit. Are there
Um,
any other ones people can try for things like the brain fog, the executive function, and stuff like that?
so I've tried lion's bane. Honestly, I haven't felt much of a difference. So maybe some people will, some people won't. That's fine. But I guess people need to get what makes a difference for them. So at some point, I think yeah, you're going to try different things for yourself. But generally, what I would advise is magnesium, zinc, because those are the minerals that are going to be helping you to import the L-tyrosine from like your digestive system to your brain. Then L-tyrosine will help because it's the precursor of dopamine. So the more you have of that amino acid, the more dopamine you have in your brain. That can definitely help. Ginkgo, ginseng, all of those can be nice because they help with the vascularization of the brain. So more blood you have in the brain, more likely you are that you have oxygen and that you have less brain fog. Then choline apparently has had some pretty nice effects. You can find a lot of choline in eggs, for example. And of course, vitamin D, because vitamin D is the precursor of serotonin. And so, more serotonin you have, less depressed you are. And vitamin D, for example, is something that you get just by standing in the sun for 20 minutes. It's just your daily dose of vitamin D standing in the sun for 20 minutes, which is also why I couldn't live in dark countries because then my ADHD and everything else was getting out of control. And I need the sun
That's
to
fast.
live.
20 minutes in
Yeah, it's
direct
enough.
sun will charge you enough.
Yeah, apparently, for most people, 20 minutes will be enough. Then, if you have a huge deficit, then you might need more, for example, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But
understandable.
for the average person, 20 minutes in the sun, that's enough to get charged up in vitamin D. It's nothing, right?
It's a walk
Uh,
around the block, isn't it?
yeah, it's just a lot of people. If you live in the UK and you have clouds all day, then where are you going to stand?
Yeah, I suppose. Do and can you get vitamin D lamps? Do they work?
I
Because I
haven't
know
tried any. I've seen some studies that said that they worked. So you probably could get some lumps, I guess. I saw also
this is
that you
purely
can
for
buy
me. I
vitamin D
was looking at one
supplements.
and I'm just thinking, am I going to waste some money here? Um,
Yeah, I've seen some people trying them and saying that they work. I haven't tried any myself though, so I cannot tell you my
yeah,
experience of
absolutely.
that. But yeah, they seem to be working quite fine in studies, so I don't see why not. Then you can also take it as a form of supplement. And then yeah, I think this is what comes to mind. Like at the moment, as supplements, I take the Brainzyme thing. Like I have a partnership with them, but they did make a difference for me, for example, right? They also have like all the scientific studies. The company was created by a PhD in biochemistry and so on. So it's kind of strong stuff. Um, and yeah, I mean, it helped me, but with a lot of things in ADHD, I don't give a lot of advice, I guess, in my videos because what works for me will not necessarily work for someone else.
And that's it.
And
That's
yeah,
important, I think. If for anybody is doing just like simply saying, I'm trying this and it is working for me, like no one can question your own experience, can you? And I think if like I might find one thing you're trying, one thing somebody else is trying, and that's the combination I need. And I'm like, wow, there we go. There's my footprint. There's my map of what I need.
yeah. And
Um,
then it's an exploration of yourself. It's just that it's difficult. It takes time. It takes energy, because a lot of times you just out of trial and error. So you're trying different things, and maybe not all of them will work, and it can be very frustrating at times. But I would say to people, all people listening to this, don't give up because there is something that will work for your specific body, for your specific brain. It's just that sometimes what works for a lot of people doesn't work for you, or vice versa. And it's important not to judge what anyone is doing to feel
mm,
happy.
yeah, absolutely. Um, I've really enjoyed this, mate. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
coming on. And I said at the start, I love to learn. And I've taken things from this myself, and I'm pretty sure anyone listening or anyone that watches back on YouTube or the Spotify and Apple channels and stuff, that there's a lot for people to learn. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that with us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's really a pleasure to come on. I really appreciate what you're doing. I've seen that you try to create a community from day one. Ever since the first time we spoke, actually, you wanted to create a community, you wanted to get things going, to meet people, to learn more, and I really appreciate that. I actually appreciate a lot of ADHD creators that are around and that are just into this kind of very positive outlook of learning about themselves and others. And yeah, it really feels nice to be here.
It is. Well, like I said at the start, like you've been somebody for me from very early on my journey that I connected with, and taken value from your content and your experience, your knowledge, your academia, because it's not like you've physically taken yourself somewhere to learn about the brain, and it's fascinating to learn from you. Now, there is one question that I didn't put on the list, which I ask everybody at the end, and you don't have to answer it just because I didn't prep you for it. But I ask everybody at the end of the podcast, knowing what you know now, if you could go back and talk to your younger self,
Ha!
what would you say to your younger self now? Knowing what you know now, what would you say to yourself and why? And again, you don't have to. I can cut this bit out because I've just looked and I realised it wasn't on the questions I sent you.
No, that's fine. I've actually, asked myself that question a lot, and the most common answer that I've come up with is that I'm not sure. And I'm not sure because I've been at a lot of different places throughout my life. And so, as a function of where I go back in time, I might not even listen to myself and I'd be like, yeah, I know better, just fuck off. Right? But I think I would definitely tell myself that it gets better, that other people are going to be mean and other people are going to judge me based on what I do or don't do, but it doesn't necessarily define who I am. You are both what you do and you're also not only what you do. It's just keep being myself. I would say that. I would say, just keep being myself, to continue to keep on, to live my dreams, to never give up that, curiosity and thirst for knowledge. Because things turned out really fine at the end of the day and at the end of the journey, and I'm really happy where I'm right now. So yeah, I wouldn't change a thing, honestly. I would just maybe just say that to my younger self and say,
Just a
hey,
reassuring message, just to go.
yeah, like I know it sucks right now, but it gets better.
Yeah, no, I love that, mate. Ludo,
And
thank you very,
yeah,
very much. For anyone that isn't, he's got a huge following anyway, but anyone that isn't, jump over. For anyone that's listening on the pod, what are your handles that people can follow?
yeah, my handles are brain.curiosities on both TikTok and Instagram. And for the moment, that's it. I'm going to be creating new things pretty soon, I guess, but this is more around, I guess, January 2025, probably. So let's see there. But yeah, thanks a lot. Honestly, thanks a lot for the invite.
No, thank you. You take care of yourself, mate. Bye bye.
Yeah, thanks so much. Bye.